Good morning if you're in Los Angeles, and good evening if you're in Great Britain. The purpose of this live stream is to gather our gang together. The single mom who was plunged into poverty because she's trying to raise her own children, and a young man who's trying to support a wife and child, often not his own biological child, and he just can't work enough hours to come up with a family budget. And then to advertise the idea of going back to home economics, you where the family unit is viewed as a basic economic building block. Just as a reminder, in home economics, picture a 1950s detached American house that was intentionally designed to get a couple out of poverty and into plenty. It had a living room that was so big you were comfortable, and a dining room and a kitchen to support the dining room, and a bedroom to sleep in, a backyard, and a driveway with a big American car that acted like a farm truck. It supported the family, that detached house, and that got everybody into a world of plenty. People got themselves killed to try and get into our society. And it was all trashed, and it was all trashed in the 1970s. To keep it up just a little bit, picture that 1950s American household, then go off to the side and start with farming and mining, then above that, manufacturing, and above that, wholesale, retail, and repair, and above that, retirement, education, and recreation. And then you can picture doctors and lawyers forming a kind of lattice that holds society together. And it's the Catholic priests that causes it all to come into being to begin with. It's a God and country thing. This stuff comes out of popes and monks and monasteries. You're a normal, well-adjusted person, which is not a natural thing at all. And then you're a good mother and a good husband, and then a good, you're a good wife, and you're a good mother. You take on the role of motherhood as a very fundamental profession in fatherhood. And then the father has a job that supports a wife and children. 10-year-olds can't pay for their mommies. Mommies can't take care of their dads. Mommies can't take care of their 10-year-olds and go out and work. And dads can't raise a 10-year-old when he's out working at the furniture factory or some such thing. And there's more than one definition to the word work, so we have to take that into account. You get the idea. It just can't be done. Picture the computer. You're listening to this now. Go up to the computer and pretend to take out a transistor. And as you take out a second transistor, and as you take out the third transistor, it's no longer a computer. It's a pile of electronic parts. Put that transistor back in. It's back to being a computer. And that's the very basic family unit. It's as opposed to individual rights. In individual rights, there's a small group of people living in the foothills. They do all the consuming, you do all the producing, and individual rights turns straight into the rights of the individuals in charge. And that's a very famous saying. It's very true. And so home economics is a phrase we'll use to describe God and country. And so we've been on for maybe a week or two. We're publicizing our trying to get gals to call in and to point out how much they make. If you're working like mad and you have a toddler, how much money do you make? Or if you're paying rent, how much money do you make? I've heard over and over again, I don't make nearly enough to make ends meet, and that's just the way it is. It is the way it is. It's the way it is now. You are a peasant in a peasant class society. So how much is rent? How much is daycare? You're paying. I'm paying somebody. I work all day so I can pay somebody else to raise my own child. I pick them up in the afternoon and take them to home. I stay up ungodly hours to try and take care of them, and in the morning I take them off to the daycare center. I'm paying somebody else to raise my own child. And that's a common theme. Even more common now is, I can't afford to take them to daycare center. I have no clue what to do. And you don't. It's getting worse and worse. It's done intentionally, believe it or not. And if you're a guy uh, you, and you're working, driving our forklift at the warehouse, and you're dating a girl and she's got a toddler, and the toddler is starting to look up to you and is calling you dad, and you find yourself trying to support a wife and a toddler, and you're picking up the role, you better start speaking up here. You don't really ask how much money do you make. You ask how many hours do you have to work in order to come up with a family budget. I guarantee you, I'll guarantee you it's more than 40 hours a week. I'll guarantee you it's more than twice that. There, so if you're listening to this, you speak up. We need to know, for example, if you live in Tollsbury, England, or St. Louis or Los Angeles, how much is a house? How much is a mortgage? How much is a health insurance? How much is school? How much are clothes and food? What's the food budget? And quite frankly, if you're going to do the producing, how much is recreation? The idea of you having a recreation budget is a joke now. And so you're just going to have to start speaking up. If you can speak up, we can do something about it. That's the purpose of these podcasts. Just so it said, there's 2 YouTube channels, and then there's a Facebook group called Time to Act, and an Instagram group called Time to Act. And I'm hoping you'll join them. And if you join them, then you can do something about it. It all has to come up from the person. Let me point out a bit of history again. In the 1950s, the Communist Party said they'd come out, they would overthrow the United States by about the year 1973. They were very specific about it. And quite frankly, the year 1973, that was the highest standard of living in the United States for the average Joe, the guy who has a job as a repairman and that sort of thing. And then it split apart. We went from, we did have a revolution in this country. We did have a profound change in our economics. We did go from home economics to individual rights. And the guys who had jobs that produced things, working in a factory or as a repairman, they had to start working more hours and more hours. And then them and their wife had to work. And now they've institutionalized teenagers back in the workplace. And it's just getting worse. It'll get worse until it collapses. Let's go back again. In the 70s, the 1950s actually went through the 1960s, into the 70s, and that's when things genuinely changed. That's when they won. And you could very easily afford be a repairman and afford a 3-bedroom brick house and a half-acre lot. You could support a wife and child. They still had to work on it, but they were getting good at it. This house you see behind me, is a house I grew up in. It was built in 1950. Our parents, our dad was a repairman, and he could afford a 3-bedroom brick house and a half-acre lot. A couple doors down was a milkman, if you remember what that is. A plumber lived next door. A guy who worked at a feed store up the road. A teacher, a photographer. You get the idea. The same people who did the producing did the consuming. And they built houses for each other. And houses were built, or they were trying to be built, along the lines of home economics. This house was built by one person. Some guy, you could see, some guy built 2 houses. They look very similar. And another guy built a house across the street. And so they take your hand, if you take your hand and push away, they not only built what would be considered mid-century modern blue-collar neighborhood, blue-collar houses. They were very individualized. And when they were first built, they they tried like mad to build the house around the people who were doing the buying, and uh, the people did the building doing the buying. The guy who built the neighborhood, his son was a famous uh, senator for decades, and it was his son's dad who built the neighborhood. And that's completely different. That's not how it is now. Uh, some guy built some guy decades ago uh, built a house, bought a house, and he was related to Deacon Seeley. So for his son to go to college, and that was a big thing. You just stared at him. How could you do? How could you afford to do that? The University of Arizona is right a short mile down the road, and it became common to buy a house for the rich guys to buy a house. Their children go to school, and they turn around and sell it, and that's because the housing prices went up so much that they could make a profit. They didn't have to pay any money. The bums rushes said they're the ones who caused the prices of houses to go up. If they had restricted houses to living in it and raising a family in it instead of an income producing thing, the world would look completely different. And it didn't stop. By the way, in the 70s, when things changed, houses around here, around the country, went up as much as $2,000 a month. And that's how profound the change was. And you could see people doing that. And then people would buy a house and rent it out. Then people would buy a house around here and build another house in the backyard. And then people would build what amounts to these two-story apartments, but they would call them houses. And you could just see a slum being built straight out of the books. This is just the sort of way slums were built back east. And everybody knew they were building a slum. Nobody could stop them. And nobody could stop them because nobody could shove your religious values down their throat. It was very strange that way. They threw out home economics. It's called the lazy V, and I put my hand up here and draw a V on its side like this. And you could just see in the most stereotypical fashion, the people cashing in on everything and becoming the upper class and causing a group of people down here, a class of peasantry. If they had gotten on to a maintenance level, it was their turn to choose. They had reached a fork in the road, and they could have chosen to get onto a maintenance level. That's where religion comes in. They'll say, we can build a house, we can put you in your own house, but we're not going to buy 2 or 3 houses and rent it out to you and move into the foothills and that sort of thing. If they had did this, then there would have been a line straight across. If that were true, then today you wouldn't be a gal trying to work 2 jobs and overtime just to try and come up with groceries for your children. Remember, these people that caused all this poverty caused this poverty. If these people go away, and these guys in the middle, the stereotypical American Yank, they come into being. If come into being, then the poverty disappears, but so does the upper class. And there was quite a battle about that. You want to get philosophical. The highest standard of living for a person in this world, if there is no God, if Christ didn't rise on the 3rd day, if some thoughts in your mind continue on after you die, then the highest standard of living is to be a psychopathic nut living in the foothills, doing all the consuming, and the whole group of people in the valley doing all the producing. That's overwhelming history of human beings on this earth. And there's emotions attached to it, the complete absence of love. And to go the other way, if they said, okay, we're going to assume Christ rose on the 3rd day, we'll hold that as faith, and then we'll act reasonably and with an argument of decency, all B or C, all A or B, all A or C, and that sort of thing, then you would have ended up with a group of normal, well-adjusted people, as best human beings can be. and a huge middle class. And the benefits of it, those people would be living in their own houses, the same people that do the producing, do the consuming, that sort of thing. If you arrange the parameters of competition so that there's a large middle class, there'll be a large middle class. If you breed a breed of normal, well-adjusted people, then there'll be a society of normal, well-adjusted people. And so that's the road we're going to walk down. They walk down the other road, and in this camp, they're called the bad guys. In this camp, the American Yank is called the good guys. And right now, you live in absolute despair. So if you're listening to this, or if you know somebody who's a gal and she has a toddler, or perhaps two teenage characters, and if you're a teenager and you have a single mom, chances are good you're going to have to try and grow up too fast, and you're going to start making horrible mistakes. It's straight out of the book. Everybody knows it, and you're still going to do it. And and if you don't watch it, you're the one that's going to be left outside of society. Chances are you'll get arrested and end up in terrible trouble. There you go. And so don't do that. Instead, we'll walk down this other road. If you start gathering this gang together, if you start calling in and start putting numbers to this, and if you're the guy and you're faced with some little guy looking up to you and he's starting to call you dad, and you're wondering what in the world you're going to do, you better speak up. They talk about reparations, and when they talk about reparations to black guys and that sort of thing, that's an absolute joke. You better start insisting on reparations. And remember something, they made money by forcing you to have to work more hours. And in the Bible, that's called one of the unforgivable sins. And all they said was, they don't care, they don't follow the Bible, so let's go. And so they're going to start paying you reparations, I hope. Let's go back to the 1960s. Remember, in psychology, they started publicizing they adopted the idea that homosexuality was no longer a mental illness. And the bum's rush there was they threw out the idea of being normal and well-adjusted, and they threw out the idea of willing the good of another person, the attitude of it, and they threw out the idea of Christ, whatever emotion is in the Catholic priest that's absent in those people. It was a bum's rush. There are three things that make up God and country in the shop manual world: straightening up your emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because of Christ rising on the third day. That emotion that you see when you have nuns and priests. And so in psychology, in the diagnostic and statistical manual, they threw that out. And you can just see people getting worse and worse, or breeding a breed of people that are far more mentally ill today than they were back then. I use, just what it said, both the Catholic and the communist, the atheist, define mental illness as the normal taken into the abnormal. The shop manual definition of mental illness, from a cold to the flu to pneumonia. The Catholics say, wait a minute, go backwards, go back to being normal, and normal is normal, but not good enough. For example, if you're a young man sitting in a chair, close your eyes, fantasize about the gals until you become sexually aroused. Open your eyes, look around, do it again, only this time in your mind, you're fantasizing about actually getting the gal pregnant. And there you go. Those very strong thoughts, to associate them with actually getting the gal pregnant, is not a natural thing at all. It's a very unnatural thing. It's true and an unnatural thing, or original sin. And you can see original sin with the snap of a finger. The same is true with fear, and the same is true with your environment. Your environment changes your attitude and demeanor, and you have to be taught that. And it's a famous phrase: what takes away your free will? Fear, sex, ignorance, and violence. What gives you a sense of free will is holding Christ's divinity as faith. That little, you go back and put that stack right side in, and then there's a star up at this, you put a star up in the sky in your mind, and that's decency. God is love. I hate that phrase. I think of the sheriff of Dodge City, the big lug who has to defend the poor and the oppressed for no reason. And there's an attitude there. And the philosophers will say there's an infusion. There's something outside your head, and as if you were tuning into some computer cloud out there. And that computer cloud they'll call faith. And that's what they call faith. And then a different set of reasoning kicks in. You being normal and well-adjusted, that kind of reasoning. A normal supply and demand curve, that kind of reasoning. Home economics, that kind of reasoning. Science. What did that guy say on television? It's a Catholic Church that developed what you and I think of as universities, the scientific method and rules of evidence. In courts, judges wore black robes because Catholic priests 500 years ago in England wore black robes. And that's why it's called a judicial court, a court that will establish facts that are true as true. And that's as opposed to a sophistical court, a court that will establish facts that aren't true as true. And you can just see it going back to original sin. And when courts in the 1970s came out and said, we shall have no religion in government, the bums rushed there. The Twilight Zone hustling moment was when they threw out God and country. And in doing so, they threw out those arguments. They threw out a judicial court, a court that will establish facts that are true as true. You know, abortion is an example. They threw out God. They separated the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant, the sexual revolution, and they institutionalized the idea of making money by causing people to work more hours. There was a time when that was illegal. There was a time when that would be called treason in the United States. And that other time is what made the United States so great. They had an awful lot of polishing up to do, but that was our shtick. That was the identity of the United States, an American Yank. We suffered from a sense of original sin. We weren't officially Catholic, and that made a big difference. And if you can hold enough liquor at 3 o'clock in the morning, you'll appreciate just what that means. But the long and short of it is, we go, when you ask what's wrong, what do you do about it and how do you do it? Well, what's wrong? They had a revolution in this country. They pushed us into the consumption society, and we're supposed to collapse and fall apart, and they come in and take over. And so what do you do about it? Well, you go to the Supreme Court and you replace those judges with judges that say only God and country. You replace them with the Apostles' Creed. And you insist that those judges, if they're going to have lifetime jobs and that sort of thing, the Supreme Court, that they're Catholic priests, they're canon law lawyers, and they hold curbs on the road. And now that you can't jump, and now I picture somebody walking down the steps of the Supreme Court, and now everything changes. Only if you want to be a citizen, you have to be normal and well-adjusted, and only those people are citizens, and then only home economics, and only people who will put you in your own business. The leadership style of washing the feet of the apostles. The guy who puts you in your own business, an owner-operator franchise, makes more money than the guy who owns several franchises. And the guys who invest in franchises are just as an investment, they're out of the picture. That was quite common for university professors, by the way. They changed society. They came in and took over from what we call the good guys. And one of the things that was quite popular, if you look back, was franchises. There was an explosion of franchises, and they'd get together and they would invest in a hamburger franchise, and they would hire teenagers to run them, and they would only work the teenagers could only work so many hours, because if they worked more hours, they'd have to get benefits, and they didn't want to pay them those benefits. And so they'd work them like dogs and for so many hours a week, and they work them until they burn out, and they fire them, get somebody else. In other words, it was those university professors, and they reinstitutionalized teenagers in the workplace. And it's a nightmare. It's a stuff that we're supposed to do something about. It's not even illegal. It's supposed to be treason. And if you think about it, this position is the stereotypical Yank, the God and country position. And their position is the opposite. When courts came out in the 70s and they said there would be no religion in government, well, one of us is committing treason, and it's not this camp. I'm starting to ramble in the good sense of the word. They have to do something about this. I don't think they will, not unless you force the issue. And so here, we're going to do something about it. But you're going to have to join the gang in the playground. That's all there is to it. So we'll try to be on Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays. Saturdays and Mondays at 11 o'clock Los Angeles time, and 7 o'clock in the evening, Great Britain, and Sundays at 8 o'clock in Los Angeles time. I think it's 4 in Great Britain. And we'll try and gather our gang together. I have to laugh because if you can, join our group on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll try and expand it. Once you do that, then we can do something about it. What you do about it, you go down to the courts and you insist that they go back to God and country, and they start making reparations towards you. That's phase one. And phase two, you go into society. You go between Tucson and Tombstone, pretend there's a ladder, and you set it that's upside down. You set it right side up. The people here in Tucson that came in and bought houses and turned them into rental property. One guy came in and bought just short of 1,000 houses and turned them into rental property. And you could see the price of the houses go up, and you wonder why. Well, that's why. It will turn around, and I'm sure they'll do the right thing. I'm sure they'll give up their houses, get a garbage sack, and go form a class of peasantry beneath the class of poverty that they cause. I don't think they'd do that willingly, but I'm sure they'll do that. Right? And then the prices of houses, just so it's go on the market, and you only sell them to the American housewife or Mrs. Miniver in England, and the prices would adjust. That guy, the father, he'll start making enough money to support a wife and children. It's doable and rather easy to set up, very difficult to work at. And it seems that the main difficulty is standing up to people who try and cash in on all of that. So yes, they very much owe you reparations, and they have to do something about it today. You have to come across to the budget today. You don't rent property to other people. You don't rent property to people. You don't rent property from people. Always end up trying to sneak something in, and Donald Trump won, and he's trying to change everything, hopefully back. And there, one of the things that's needed is his wife, whose name I always have problems pronouncing, Melania Trump. She could be an absolute voice for the gal who's the single mom, the gal who's trying to raise a child professionally, trying to be a good wife and mother, and she was shunned from the guys who run the show these days, and she would be absolutely perfect. If she could speak up for you, and when she does that, if she does that, then you have a voice. You can really go to work here. So I hope someone's listening. I hope someone goes and taps her on the shoulder and tells her to get out there and do something. Just so it said, you always add one thing. You better be careful. This certainly isn't a Donald Trump. This is very much Donald Trump came in, he won, and he's about to stand up to all these guys. He stood up to a bum's rush, and that's what makes him so terribly important. He has a chance to be an George Washington, not only to the United States, but to the world. I hope he does. But remember, that's not a conservative position. That's not going from liberal to conservative or from Democrat to Republican. And you could just see a mistake. You have to go behind Donald Trump's back and then straighten things out. And then guys like Trump can go to work. This immigration stuff is one of them. If you take a step back in our world, rearrange things back along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil. The priest is a good guy, and he says, say what you mean what you say. And on the other side is a pimp, and he knows how to hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people. And he's called the bad guy. If you go back to this world, then there's a lot of immigration. There's a lot of gals who came up to try and be just like Melania, just like Mrs. Trump, just tried to be the American housewife. And there's an awful lot of people who came up trying to colonize the United States and make it part of Mexico, and they would be called the bad guys. In fact, remember we have about 3 dozen short anecdotes on our YouTube channel. And remember Raul Castro, the former governor of Arizona, when he was in his 90s, a few decades back, giving a speech, and they publicized it on cable access. And he was giving a speech to a group of Mexicans, a Mexican group, and the guy introducing him was bragging about how they had been they're out to change the demographics. And Castro got up and he started singing the praises of Fidel Castro. And then he paused and said, look how many presidents have come, and Fidel Castro's still there, come and gone. And he shrugged his shoulders and says, hey, it works. And we use that to point out a handful of things. One, yes, there's a group trying to make this area part of Mexico. They're very common. It's a very thinly veiled thing. And so a lot of them are in government here in Tucson. Why do we even need a two-party system, says one of them. There are members of La Raza is another one who they stick in the Congress a lot. It just goes on from there. And they're called the bad guys. So when you have that sense of category and you're deporting out all these people, that's great. Don't deport all of them. Keep the ones who want to be an American Yank. Race relegated to an endearing quality of your parents. And then get the rest out of here. Donald Trump, by the way, is talking about immigration. Donald Trump was commenting, and he was just talking in a sense about something else, about Mexico. He said, hey, there's nothing keeping Mexico from being a state in the United States. Yes, as a matter of fact, there's nothing keeping Mexico from becoming a state in the United States. Remember, they're a communist country. They have a small group of people and a huge gap and a huge group of poverty. And if you're arrested, you have to prove your innocence, not the other way around. I remember the story a few years back about the Catholic bishop who criticized the government, and he was arrested because it's illegal to criticize the government. There's not one thing keeping them from dissolving, from adopting the American dollar, it takes a minimum of 3 generations from my school days to breed, whatever the words, a group of Yanks, a group of normal, well-adjusted people to change society. And there's nothing keeping anybody from taking that silly wall and building it 50 miles further south. And that's the attitude you have to have. Be fair is fair. When the Pope says, look, you got to do stuff like this, you got to take into account immigration. You take into account all these guys that took prisoners out of their jails and sent them to the United States to tear everything down and all sorts of things. And you keep the good guys and you send the bad guys over there. There's not one thing keeping the Mexican government from doing the right thing. So when people like the Pope say, be decent, well, you speak up and say, you're darn right. Decency is a formal argument, Bob. You keep these Mexican gals, They go over with the white gal and the black gal and the Chinese gal, and they get over to the shopping mall and out of the cleaning houses, and they start acting like young gals are supposed to act like in the United States. And these other people, these gals, the president of Mexico and a lot of the federal government, a lot of the city government here in Tucson, they start answering for this. And that's the attitude you have to have. You have to go behind Donald Trump and to the Supreme Court and bring back God and country. And if the idea of just what a Yank is, just what defined us. And the same is true if you're in England. You don't let people, Muslims or Hindus or anybody else, show up and start changing your culture. You had a very nice culture. Most of the world comes from you. And so when people criticize Great Britain, take it as a compliment. I've never heard once anybody say, I've heard people say when King Henry VIII changed, he really screwed up, and it did lots of bad things throughout the world. I've never once heard anybody say, do you see these Indians here in Arizona? They screwed up, and so everybody paid a price for it. Nope, sorry, it doesn't work that way. You guys are top of the class, as the Brits say. It's up to you to start speaking up about the good guy Brits. Well, that's it. I think you get the idea. Please spread the word. If you hear somebody, get them to start calling in. I'm a gal. This is what I need. I'm going back to the 1950s housewife. I'm going to be a professional citizen and then a housewife. And this is what the family budget is, what the budget is in a car and a school and tennis rackets for you, because if you need recreation time and you're going to get it. And if you're a guy, there's actually an infusion there, you get to have a say in some of that stuff too. But just to get the thought out, if you're a guy, you ask yourself, how many hours do I have to work to come up with that kind of that money? And if you'll call in, if you'll start doing something, then you can do something about it. I hope to see you next week, and I hope to see you on that Facebook channel, Time to Act, and Instagram, Time to Act, and YouTube, which is The Priest and the Pimp. And so we look forward to seeing you then.